The phone kept ringing long after everyone else had gone quiet, and that was the first sign that something about this night was far from over. The flashing red and blue lights reflected across the windshield of Naomi Carter's silver Honda as she guided her car onto the shoulder of Route 17 just outside the small town of Ashford, Georgia. It was a warm Thursday evening in late spring, and the last traces of sunlight stretched across the horizon in shades of gold and orange. Naomi glanced at the dashboard clock. 7:42 p.m. She was running a little late, but not worried. Earlier that day, she had spent hours helping students prepare for their elementary school graduation ceremony, and now she was heading home looking forward to dinner with her husband. Her phone rested in the cup holder beside her purse. A stack of colorful student drawings sat neatly on the passenger seat. To anyone passing by, she looked exactly like what she was, a respected teacher returning home after a long day. Officer Ryan Mercer stepped out of his patrol vehicle and approached with deliberate confidence. The beam of his flashlight swept across the side of Naomi's car even though there was still enough daylight to see clearly. Naomi lowered her window and placed both hands on the steering wheel. Years of hearing stories had taught her to be careful during traffic stops. "Good evening, officer," she said politely. Mercer didn't return the greeting. His eyes moved over the interior of the vehicle before settling on Naomi. "License and registration." Naomi nodded. "Of course." She moved slowly, carefully explaining each motion before reaching for her purse. The encounter should have lasted only a few minutes. Instead, the tension grew heavier with every passing second. Drivers traveling past the scene slowed slightly as they noticed the patrol car. A man at a nearby gas station glanced toward the highway. Two teenagers sitting in a parked pickup truck across the road watched from a distance. Something about the interaction felt wrong, though no one could explain why. Naomi remained calm. Her voice never rose. She answered every question. She followed every instruction. Yet Officer Mercer seemed increasingly irritated by her composure. Minutes stretched longer. The evening air felt still. Then something happened that caused the entire atmosphere to shift. The details would be debated for hours. Statements would be written. Reports would be filed. Rumors would spread across town before midnight. But one fact remained unchanged. Before the night was over, Naomi Carter would never make it home. By 8:17 p.m., emergency vehicles had arrived. Traffic slowed to a crawl. Flashing lights illuminated the roadside while curious onlookers gathered behind temporary barriers. Some recorded video. Others whispered among themselves. A local reporter received a call and rushed toward the scene. Through all the confusion, one small object remained on the pavement near the shoulder of the road. Naomi's phone. The screen was cracked, but still functioning. And at 8:31 p.m., it began to ring. The caller ID displayed a single name. Marcus. The call went unanswered. A few minutes later it rang again. Then again. Then again. Officers moved around the scene, focused on paperwork, witnesses, and procedures. No one paid much attention to the phone. No one noticed how many times it continued ringing into the night. No one knew who Marcus Carter was. And no one, especially Officer Ryan Mercer, had the slightest idea that before sunrise the next morning, that unanswered phone call would set events in motion that would bring an entire town to a standstill. Long before anyone in Ashford was discussing police reports, witness statements, or unanswered questions, Naomi Carter was simply the person everyone trusted. The next morning, while conversations about the previous night's incident spread from one corner of town to another, dozens of people were waking up with memories of her kindness. At Ashford Elementary School, the hallways felt strangely quiet. Colorful graduation decorations still hung from bulletin boards. Construction paper stars lined the walls. Handwritten thank you cards remained taped outside classroom doors. Several teachers stood together in the faculty lounge, speaking in hushed voices. None of them seemed ready to accept what they had heard. Naomi had spent 8 years helping children navigate difficult moments. She remembered birthdays, attended school plays, and somehow managed to learn the names of every student's younger siblings and family pets. Parents often joked that she knew more about their households than they did. Yet beneath the laughter was genuine appreciation. She cared. Everyone knew it. At 7:30 that same morning, Principal Denise Harper unlocked her office and immediately noticed a line of voicemail notifications blinking on her phone. Parents were calling. Teachers were calling. Former students were calling. News traveled quickly in a small town. Denise sat quietly at her desk and stared at a framed photograph taken just 2 weeks earlier. Naomi stood in the center of a group of fifth graders, smiling as they held up certificates from a reading competition. The photograph captured exactly who she was. Calm, encouraging, present. Across town, 12-year-old Emma Rodriguez sat at her kitchen table, staring at a folded note. Naomi had written it 3 months earlier after Emma struggled with confidence during a school presentation. The message was simple. Believe in yourself. You are stronger than you think. Emma had carried the note in her backpack ever since. Her mother found her reading it again that morning with tears in her eyes. Similar scenes unfolded throughout Ashford. Former students shared stories online. Parents posted photographs. Neighbors remembered small acts of kindness that once seemed ordinary but now felt important. The owner of a local bakery recalled how Naomi secretly paid for birthday cupcakes when a struggling family could not afford them. A librarian remembered how she spent Saturday mornings organizing reading programs. A crossing guard remembered winter mornings when Naomi brought hot coffee during freezing temperatures. Piece by piece, a portrait emerged, not from official records or news broadcasts, but from the people whose lives she had quietly touched. Meanwhile, less than 10 miles away, Marcus Carter sat alone in the living room of the home he had shared with Naomi for 6 years. Sunlight filtered through the curtains. Her favorite coffee mug still sat on the kitchen counter exactly where she had left it the day before. A stack of student artwork remained spread across the dining room table. Marcus had not moved any of it. The silence felt heavier than words. Throughout the night, his phone had barely stopped ringing. Friends, family, reporters, community leaders. He ignored most of them. Instead, he sat looking at a single photograph on his phone. It showed Naomi standing beside a group of graduating students the previous spring. She was laughing at something outside the frame. Marcus stared at the image for a long time. Then his phone vibrated again. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. Almost. After a brief pause, he answered. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. No greetings. No explanations. Just a few short sentences spoken quietly. When the call ended, Marcus looked out the window toward the empty street. His expression did not change. He simply placed the phone down and remained seated. Hundreds of miles away, in locations scattered across multiple states, several individuals received messages before breakfast. Some were retired. Some were active duty. Others had not spoken to Marcus in months. Yet every one of them reacted the same way when they saw his name appear on their screen. Whatever plans they had for the day immediately became secondary. Back in Ashford, Officer Ryan Mercer arrived at the police station expecting another routine morning. He believed the worst was already behind him. He believed the official reports would settle everything. He believed the questions would eventually fade. What he did not know was that while the town remembered Naomi Carter, other people were beginning to ask questions of their own, and before the sun set again, those questions would become impossible to ignore. By late morning, the Ashford Police Department had settled into what many officers assumed would be an ordinary day. Phones rang. Reports were filed. Patrol assignments were updated. Coffee brewed in the break room. Yet beneath the routine, an uneasy tension lingered. Officer Ryan Mercer sat at his desk reviewing paperwork connected to the previous evening. Every line he typed seemed designed to reinforce a version of events he wanted everyone else to accept. Across the room, Officer Daniel Brooks glanced toward him several times before finally looking away. Brooks had been one of the first officers to arrive after the traffic stop, and something about the entire situation continued to bother him. He could not explain it clearly, but the details refused to fit together as neatly as the official narrative suggested. Around 10 o'clock, Chief Harold Bennett called a short meeting. The officers gathered in the briefing room while Bennett stood at the front with a folder tucked beneath his arm. His expression remained serious. "I want everyone staying professional," he said. "Questions are coming from local media, community leaders, and outside agencies. Until reviews are complete, nobody discusses details outside official channels." Several officers nodded. Mercer leaned back in his chair with apparent confidence. To him, the statement sounded like reassurance. Procedures were being followed. Leadership was standing behind the department. Everything would eventually settle down. At least that was what he believed. Meanwhile, throughout Ashford, public interest continued growing. A local reporter named Hannah Pierce spent the morning speaking with witnesses. Most people hesitated to go on record, but many shared similar observations. They described Naomi as calm, cooperative, respectful. None of their descriptions matched the image being quietly suggested through unofficial rumors. Hannah filled pages of notes. By noon, she noticed another pattern. Multiple witnesses mentioned seeing phones recording portions of the encounter from different angles. That detail immediately caught her attention. If recordings existed, they could answer questions far more effectively than speculation ever could. Back at the station, Mercer received a brief phone call from someone he knew within county administration. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. When it ended, he appeared noticeably more relaxed. Whatever concerns had troubled him earlier seemed to fade. He even joked with another officer while walking through the hallway. Confidence returned to his posture. Outside, however, events were moving beyond his view. In Jacksonville, Florida, a retired military instructor canceled an afternoon meeting after receiving a message shortly after sunrise. In Virginia Beach, a former team leader rearranged travel plans and boarded an earlier flight. In Texas, Arizona, North Carolina, and several other states, similar decisions unfolded. None of the individuals spoke publicly. None announced their intentions. Yet all of them responded with remarkable speed. They shared one common connection. Every one of them knew Marcus Carter. Shortly after lunch, Marcus himself drove into Ashford. His truck rolled quietly through town before stopping near the elementary school where Naomi had worked. He remained parked across the street for nearly 20 minutes. Children played on a nearby playground. Teachers moved between buildings. Life continued as usual for everyone else. Marcus simply watched. Eventually, Principal Denise Harper stepped outside and noticed him sitting alone. She crossed the parking lot and approached the driver's side window. Neither spoke for several moments. Then Denise placed a small cardboard box through the open window. Inside were dozens of handwritten letters from students. Marcus thanked her softly. Denise wiped tears from her eyes before returning to the school. Marcus remained parked for another minute before driving away. Late that afternoon, Officer Brooks decided to review evidence logs connected to the previous evening. What he found raised new concerns. Several entries appeared incomplete. Certain timestamps seemed inconsistent. One notation referenced digital files that had not yet been uploaded into the system. Brooks frowned. He checked again. The discrepancy remained. Across town, Hannah Pierce received an anonymous text message. It contained only 8 words. Check the gas station 2 miles south. No name. No explanation. Just a location. As evening approached, separate pieces of a much larger puzzle were beginning to move into place. Most people in Ashford remained unaware of it. Ryan Mercer certainly was. He left the station shortly before sunset, believing another ordinary night awaited him. What he did not know was that somewhere beyond the town limits, several vehicles were already heading toward Ashford, and every mile they traveled brought answers closer than anyone expected. Darkness settled over Ashford as streetlights flickered to life across the quiet town. But for a growing number of people, the day was far from over. Inside the offices of the Ashford Gazette, reporter Hannah Pierce sat alone beneath the glow of her desk lamp, reviewing notes she had collected since sunrise. Witness names filled several pages. Timelines covered a whiteboard behind her desk. Yet one detail continued pulling her attention back to the anonymous message she had received earlier that afternoon. Check the gas station 2 miles south. Nothing more. No explanation. No signature. After debating for nearly an hour, she finally grabbed her keys and headed out. The drive took less than 10 minutes. The gas station sat beside a quiet stretch of highway illuminated by bright overhead lights. Evening customers moved in and out of the convenience store, while vehicles stopped briefly before continuing toward neighboring towns. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. Hannah parked near the edge of the lot and walked inside. The cashier on duty introduced herself as Linda Morrison. She appeared nervous the moment Hannah mentioned Naomi Carter. The reaction immediately caught Hannah's attention. "I am not looking for trouble," Hannah said gently. "I just want to understand what happened." Linda glanced toward the security monitors mounted above the counter. For several seconds, she remained silent. Then she lowered her voice. "You did not hear this from me." Hannah listened carefully. Linda explained that multiple people had gathered at the station shortly after the traffic stopped the previous evening because emergency vehicles had temporarily rerouted traffic nearby. Several customers had recorded video clips from different angles while standing outside. Some footage showed nothing useful. Some showed only flashing lights. But according to Linda, at least one person captured several minutes that investigators had not publicly discussed. Who was it? Hannah asked. Linda shook her head. I do not know, but I know someone came asking questions before sunrise. Hannah felt a chill run through her. Who? Linda hesitated. A man in a black pickup truck. Across town, Marcus Carter sat at the kitchen table reviewing a stack of handwritten letters from Naomi's students. Some were written in colorful crayon. Others contained careful pencil handwriting from children trying their best to express feelings they barely understood. One letter simply read, "Thank you for always believing in me." Marcus folded the note carefully and placed it back inside the box. His phone buzzed. Another message. This time it contained only a location and a time. No greeting. No explanation. Marcus read it once, locked his phone, and quietly stood. Meanwhile, Officer Daniel Brooks remained at the station long after most employees had gone home. The inconsistencies he discovered earlier continued bothering him. He reviewed timestamps again. Then he checked digital evidence logs a second time. The same problem remained. Certain files appeared referenced in reports, but were not available in the database. Brooks leaned back in his chair and stared at the screen. Either someone had made several unusual administrative mistakes in a single night, or something else was happening. Neither possibility made him comfortable. Around 9:30, Ryan Mercer pulled into the driveway of his home. The neighborhood appeared peaceful. Children rode bicycles beneath streetlights. Neighbors walked dogs along quiet sidewalks. Everything looked normal. Yet Mercer noticed something unusual when he checked his phone. Several missed calls from numbers he did not recognize. He frowned but dismissed the concern. Reporters often search for comments after controversial incidents. He convinced himself that was all it was. Inside the house, he turned on the television and attempted to relax. Outside, however, events continued moving in directions he could not see. Along highways stretching across multiple states, vehicles traveled steadily through the night. Some carried former military personnel. Others carried individuals connected through years of shared service and loyalty. None attracted attention. None displayed anything unusual. Yet all of them were moving toward the same destination. Back at the newspaper office, Hannah received another anonymous message just before midnight. This one contained 6 words. The phone matters more than you think. Hannah stared at the screen. Across town, Marcus received a message of his own at nearly the exact same moment. Unlike Hannah, he already knew exactly what it meant. Just after midnight, Ashford seemed asleep. Storefront lights were off. Traffic had disappeared from the main roads, and most residents had retreated into the comfort of their homes. Yet beneath the quiet surface, important conversations continued unfolding behind closed doors. Hannah Pierce sat in her office staring at the latest anonymous message on her phone. The phone matters more than you think. She repeated the words several times. Something about them felt deliberate. She opened her notebook and began reviewing every reference to Naomi's phone from witness interviews. Within minutes, a pattern emerged. Multiple people remembered hearing it ring repeatedly after the incident. Several recalled seeing it lying near the roadside long before investigators secured the area. One witness even mentioned that the screen remained active for quite some time. Hannah leaned back in her chair. If the phone contained recordings, messages, call logs, or location data, it could become one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire case. Across town, Marcus Carter drove through empty streets with no clear destination visible to anyone watching. He eventually pulled into the parking lot of a small church on the edge of town. The building was dark except for a single light glowing near the entrance. Marcus remained inside his truck for several minutes before another vehicle arrived. An older man stepped out and approached without hesitation. The two men exchanged a brief handshake. No introductions were necessary. They had known each other for years. Their conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. No raised voices. No dramatic gestures. Just calm discussion between individuals who understood one another completely. When the meeting ended, the older man handed Marcus a small folder. Marcus thanked him, returned to his truck, and drove away. Meanwhile, Officer Daniel Brooks continued examining records inside the police station. Most of the building was empty now. The night shift occupied only a small portion of the facility. Brooks quietly compared digital timestamps from several systems. The more he reviewed, the less comfortable he became. Certain entries appeared altered after their original submission. Small changes, minor adjustments, the kind that might escape casual review. But Brooks had worked with evidence long enough to recognize when details no longer aligned naturally. He printed several pages and slipped them into a folder. Something told him he might need copies later. Not far away, Ryan Mercer slept soundly, unaware that questions about the previous evening were multiplying faster than answers. He still believed procedures would protect him. He still believed public attention would eventually move elsewhere. He did not know that outside Ashford, more people had begun paying attention than he could possibly imagine. Along interstate highways stretching across the southeastern United States, vehicles continued moving through the darkness. Drivers stopped briefly for fuel, coffee, and directions before returning to the road. Some traveled alone. Others traveled in pairs. None drew attention. Yet if someone had examined the destinations programmed into their navigation systems, they would have noticed the same town appearing again and again. Ashford. Shortly before 3 o'clock in the morning, Marcus finally returned home. He carried the folder inside and placed it on the dining room table beside the stack of letters from Naomi's students. For a long moment, he simply stood there looking at the room around him. Then he opened the folder. Inside were documents, photographs, and several pages of notes. Near the bottom rested a single printed image. It showed Naomi smiling beside a group of children during a community reading event. Marcus looked at the photograph before turning it over. A handwritten message appeared on the back. "We stand together." His expression remained calm, but something in his eyes hardened with quiet determination. Outside, the first hints of dawn were still hours away. Most of Ashford remained asleep. Yet the longest night of the story was only beginning, and by sunrise, people throughout the town would wake to sights they never expected to see. The first glow of dawn had not yet appeared when Ashford began to change. A thin layer of fog drifted across the empty roads while porch lights flickered in quiet neighborhoods. Most residents were still asleep, unaware that the coming hours would become the most talked-about morning in the town's history. At 4:37 a.m., Hannah Pierce was awakened by the sound of her phone vibrating across the nightstand. She blinked at the screen and immediately sat upright. Another anonymous message had arrived. This one was different. There were only 4 words. "Watch the highways." Hannah stared at the message for several seconds before grabbing her jacket and keys. Something in her instincts told her not to ignore it. 20 minutes later, she was parked near an overpass overlooking Route 17. The sky remained dark blue, with only a faint silver glow beginning to emerge along the horizon. Traffic was nearly non-existent. A few delivery trucks passed. Then she noticed something unusual. A black sport utility vehicle moved steadily down the highway. A second followed several hundred yards behind. Then a third. Then another. None were speeding. None drew attention individually. Yet together they formed a pattern that immediately caught her attention. Hannah lifted her camera and began recording. Meanwhile, across town, Marcus Carter stood in his backyard holding a mug of untouched coffee. The cool morning air moved gently through the trees. His phone rested on the patio table beside him. Every few minutes another message appeared. Some contained nothing more than a location update. Others simply read, "Arrived." Marcus never replied. He only read each message before placing the phone back down. His calmness seemed almost unnatural. Yet beneath that calm existed a focus that had only sharpened throughout the night. Inside the Ashford Police Department, the overnight dispatcher noticed increased activity on several monitoring channels. Nothing alarming. Nothing that required immediate action. Just small details that felt unusual. Vehicles entering town. Hotel reservations filling unexpectedly. Fuel purchases at multiple stations. Individually, the reports meant very little. Together, they created a picture no one fully understood. Officer Daniel Brooks arrived early for his shift. The folder containing copied records remained locked inside his vehicle. He had barely slept. Questions continued turning over in his mind. As he entered the station, he noticed something else. Chief Bennett was already there. So were 2 county administrators. Their presence at that hour immediately felt unusual. Through a conference room window, Brooks saw serious expressions and stacks of paperwork spread across the table. Whatever was happening, it was growing larger than a routine internal review. Across town, residents slowly began their morning routines. Coffee makers started brewing. School buses prepared for routes. Business owners unlocked front doors. Then people started noticing the vehicles. Black sport utility vehicles appeared throughout Ashford. Some parked near hotels. Others stopped at diners. A few gathered in parking lots before continuing toward different parts of town. The occupants were quiet, disciplined, professional. They drew attention not because of anything they did, but because of the unmistakable purpose in their movements. At a diner near the interstate, an elderly waitress watched several of the newcomers enter one after another. They were polite, respectful, yet there was something unusual about the way they carried themselves. One customer quietly asked where he could find the courthouse. Another requested directions to the police station. None stayed long. By 7 o'clock, social media posts had begun appearing across Ashford. Residents shared photographs of unfamiliar vehicles. Questions spread quickly. Who are these people? Why are they here? No one seemed to have an answer. Ryan Mercer noticed the activity while scrolling through his phone during breakfast. He frowned at several posts before dismissing them. Small towns attracted attention after controversial events. Curious outsiders often arrived hoping to witness developments firsthand. That explanation satisfied him for the moment. Yet as he drove toward the station, he could not shake a growing sense of unease. The town felt different. The streets felt different. It was as though Ashford was quietly waiting for something. And as the first rays of sunlight finally broke across the horizon, more vehicles crossed the town limits, bringing with them a presence that would soon make it impossible for anyone to pretend this was just another ordinary morning. By 8 o'clock that morning, Ashford no longer felt like the same town it had been 24 hours earlier. Residents gathering at coffee shops and gas stations found themselves discussing the same question. Who were all the newcomers, and why had they arrived so suddenly? The answer remained unclear, but the atmosphere had shifted. Conversations grew quieter whenever unfamiliar faces entered a room. Observant people noticed that many of the visitors seemed to recognize one another despite arriving separately. They exchanged brief nods. Short greetings. Nothing dramatic. Yet there was an unmistakable sense of coordination beneath the surface. At the Ashford Gazette, Hannah Pierce reviewed dozens of photographs submitted by residents through social media. Images of black sport utility vehicles. Images of men and women meeting in small groups. Images of people standing outside diners, hotels, and public buildings. One photograph immediately caught her attention. It showed 3 of the visitors speaking with an elderly veteran outside a hardware store. Hannah enlarged the image and studied their posture. Their appearance was ordinary, but something about them felt remarkably disciplined. They stood with calm confidence, as though they were accustomed to operating under pressure. She added the photograph to a growing folder on her desktop labeled Morning Arrivals. Across town, Marcus Carter drove toward the local cemetery. The roads were becoming busier as people started their day, yet nobody paid much attention to the quiet pickup truck moving through traffic. Marcus parked near a row of oak trees and stepped out. The morning air carried the scent of freshly cut grass. For several minutes, he stood alone in silence. Then his phone vibrated. Another message. He glanced at the screen. The text contained only 2 words. All present. Marcus read the message once before locking the phone and placing it back into his pocket. His expression never changed. Meanwhile, Officer Daniel Brooks found himself increasingly distracted. The unexplained discrepancies in the evidence records continued bothering him. He had spent hours searching for simple explanations, but each answer only seemed to create additional questions. Shortly after arriving at work, he received a call from a former academy classmate now employed by a neighboring department. The conversation began casually, but quickly turned serious. "You have people asking questions about Ashford," the caller said. "A lot of people." Brooks frowned. "What kind of people?" There was a brief pause. "The kind who usually do not get involved unless something matters." The call ended moments later, leaving Brooks staring silently at his desk. Elsewhere in town, Ryan Mercer noticed growing attention from both local residents and outside observers. Every time he checked social media, new discussions appeared. Reporters were asking questions. Community leaders were requesting information. Even neighboring departments seemed unusually interested in developments. Although he tried to remain confident, an uncomfortable feeling had begun settling into the back of his mind. For the first time, he found himself wondering whether the situation was truly under control. Around mid-morning, something unexpected happened. Several of the visitors gathered near the town square. They were not protesting. They were not making speeches. They simply stood together talking quietly. Residents passing by watched with curiosity. Some recognized military tattoos. Others noticed the way the group naturally organized itself without discussion. Nobody appeared to be in charge, yet everyone seemed to understand exactly where they belonged. Hannah arrived minutes later with her camera. She expected resistance when she approached, but instead one of the men smiled politely and held the door open as she entered a nearby coffee shop. Another greeted an elderly customer by name after reading it from a name tag. Their behavior only deepened the mystery. These were not angry outsiders looking for conflict. They appeared focused on something else entirely, something larger. By late morning, rumors spread that additional vehicles were still entering Ashford from neighboring counties. Hotel parking lots were nearly full. Restaurants reported unusually heavy business. Yet despite the growing numbers, there were no disturbances, no public demands, no dramatic confrontations, only a steady, disciplined presence that seemed to expand hour by hour. Then, shortly before noon, Marcus received another message. Unlike the others, this one included a location. He read it carefully. For the first time all morning, a faint reaction crossed his face. Not relief, not satisfaction, determination. He slipped the phone into his pocket and started the truck. Across town, dozens of people continued wondering why so many strangers had come to Ashford. What none of them realized was that the arrivals were only one part of a much larger plan, and before the day was over, the first answers would finally begin to emerge. Shortly after noon, the mystery that had been building over Ashford since sunrise finally began to reveal its shape. Residents standing outside restaurants, hardware stores, and coffee shops noticed a steady movement toward one destination. Not a protest, not a rally. People simply started gathering near the county administration building and the police department across the street. The visitors who had quietly arrived throughout the morning seemed to know exactly where they were going. They walked with purpose, but without urgency. They spoke little, yet their presence carried an unmistakable weight. Hannah Pierce parked her car half a block away and stepped onto the sidewalk with her camera hanging from her shoulder. The crowd was growing by the minute. Local residents stood beside curious reporters. Business owners left their stores to watch. Even teachers from Ashford Elementary appeared during lunch breaks. Nobody wanted to miss whatever was about to happen. Across the street, Officer Ryan Mercer stood near the entrance of the police department, attempting to project confidence. He exchanged brief words with other officers and occasionally glanced toward the gathering crowd. What bothered him most was not the number of people arriving. It was their demeanor. No one seemed angry. No one appeared emotional. Instead, they looked focused, as if they had come for a specific reason and intended to remain until they found it. Inside the county administration building, Chief Harold Bennett sat through a tense meeting with several officials. Phones rang constantly. Requests for information continued arriving from outside agencies. Questions multiplied faster than answers. More than once, someone asked whether all available evidence had been properly secured. Each time the room grew noticeably quieter. Meanwhile, Marcus Carter drove slowly through town before pulling into a parking space near the courthouse square. For several moments he remained inside the truck. Then he stepped out and began walking toward the growing crowd. People recognized him immediately. Conversations softened as he passed. A few residents offered quiet condolences. Others simply nodded respectfully. Marcus acknowledged each gesture with calm appreciation before continuing forward. Hannah noticed him almost immediately. She lifted her camera, but hesitated before taking a photograph. Something about Marcus commanded attention without ever demanding it. He moved through the crowd with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly why he was there. As he approached the center of the square, several of the visitors who had arrived earlier subtly shifted positions. No introductions occurred. No instructions were exchanged. Yet they seemed aware of his presence the moment he arrived. Hannah watched carefully. The realization struck her all at once. These people had not chosen Ashford randomly. They had come because of Marcus. The thought sent a rush of questions through her mind. Who exactly was he? Why did so many disciplined, highly capable individuals appear connected to him? And why had nobody mentioned it before now? At nearly the same moment, another line of vehicles entered town. Unlike earlier arrivals, these immediately drew attention. Residents turned toward the road. Reporters lifted cameras. Conversations stopped. One after another, dark vehicles rolled quietly down Main Street. They obeyed every traffic law. They moved without flashing lights or dramatic displays. Yet their arrival changed the atmosphere instantly. Even Ryan Mercer noticed. His confidence began to fade. The crowd watched as the vehicles parked in an orderly fashion near the square. Men and women stepped out. Some wore civilian clothing. Others carried themselves with unmistakable military bearing. They greeted familiar faces already present and joined the growing assembly. Within minutes, dozens of them stood together throughout the area. No speeches followed. No demands were made. Their mere presence spoke louder than words. Hannah looked around and realized everyone else felt it too. Whatever connection existed between these individuals and Marcus Carter was far more significant than anyone had imagined. Then Marcus's phone vibrated. He removed it from his pocket and read the message. For the first time all day, a faint smile appeared. The message contained only 3 words. "We found it." Across the square, Hannah saw the change in his expression and knew instantly that something important had just happened. What nobody else knew was that the search that had quietly unfolded since the previous night had finally produced a breakthrough, and the truth people had been trying to uncover was now closer than ever. The message spread through the crowd faster than anyone expected. Nobody knew exactly what had been found, but word traveled from one conversation to the next until nearly everyone gathered around the courthouse square sensed that something important had changed. Marcus Carter remained calm. He slipped his phone back into his pocket and looked across the street toward the police department. Around him, the men and women who had quietly arrived throughout the day maintained the same disciplined composure they had shown since entering Ashford. Yet there was a noticeable difference now. Their waiting seemed to be over. Inside the police department, Chief Harold Bennett received a call that immediately drained the color from his face. He listened silently for nearly a minute before ending the conversation and staring at the conference room table. The county attorney sitting across from him noticed the reaction immediately. "What happened?" she asked. Bennett exhaled slowly. The missing data was recovered. The room fell silent. Nobody needed to ask which data. For the first time since the previous evening, several officials realized events were no longer moving according to assumptions. Outside, reporter Hannah Pierce received confirmation from a trusted source only minutes later. The phone that had been discussed in whispers since the beginning of the investigation had yielded information investigators could not ignore. Call records, timestamps, location data, digital activity. None of it provided dramatic revelations on its own, but together the information established a timeline that demanded closer examination. Hannah immediately began organizing her notes. The story was changing. Across town, Officer Daniel Brooks sat quietly at his desk reviewing the evidence discrepancies one final time. Before noon, he had still questioned his own instincts. Now he no longer did. The inconsistencies were real. More importantly, people outside the department had started asking the same questions he had been asking all day. For the first time since the incident, Brooks felt something resembling relief. Truth had a way of surviving even when people tried to bury it beneath paperwork and assumptions. Meanwhile, Ryan Mercer sat alone in an office reviewing updates on his computer. The confidence he had displayed that morning was gone. New requests for documentation continued arriving. Additional reviews were being scheduled. Supervisors wanted answers. Administrators wanted clarification. Every hour seemed to produce another complication. When he glanced out the window, he noticed the crowd across the street had grown larger. More cameras, more reporters, more observers. For the first time, he felt genuinely uncertain about what would happen next. Back in the square, a local resident approached Marcus and quietly asked the question everyone had been wondering. Who are all these people? Marcus looked around at the gathered men and women. Some were speaking with reporters. Others stood quietly beneath the afternoon sun. A few were talking with local residents. None were seeking attention. "Friends," Marcus answered simply. The resident nodded. Though it was obvious he suspected the answer barely scratched the surface. As the afternoon continued, the true significance of their presence became impossible to ignore. Many had served together. Many had known Marcus for years. Some had traveled hundreds of miles after receiving a single message. Not because they expected recognition. Not because they wanted publicity. They came because someone they respected needed support, and they believed Naomi Carter deserved answers. By late afternoon, official announcements confirmed that outside agencies would participate in reviewing the investigation. Additional evidence would be examined. Procedures would be evaluated. Independent oversight would be involved. The news spread rapidly through Ashford. Residents gathered in restaurants and living rooms discussing the developments. Parents from Naomi's school shared updates online. Former students posted photographs and memories. Slowly, the conversation began shifting away from rumors and toward facts. As the sun started descending toward the horizon, Hannah stood near the courthouse steps reviewing everything that had happened during the previous 24 hours. A town had been forced to confront difficult questions. A community had united around someone they loved. And a group of strangers had arrived, carrying a message more powerful than any speech. Accountability matters. Truth matters. People matter. Across the square, Marcus looked toward the evening sky and thought about Naomi. For the first time since receiving the terrible phone call, he felt certain of one thing. The story was not ending with silence. The search for answers had only begun, and now the entire country was paying attention.